Welcome to the Word for 2021. Today we're in Genesis chapter 19. This chapter is a sad chapter from beginning to end. It talks about Sodom and Gomorrah and the destruction of those cities. There are many today that wish that this chapter was not in the Bible, or that Sodom was not even mentioned. But Sodom is mentioned 48 times in Scripture. The sin of Sodom is mentioned throughout Scripture. In Genesis chapter 13, verse 13, it says that the men of Sodom were wicked. In Isaiah chapter 3, verse 9, it says that those in Sodom paraded their sin. In Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 14, it says that those that lived in Sodom committed adultery. They lived a lie. They strengthened the hands of evildoers. That means that they promoted and they protected sin. No one there in Sodom ever turned away from their wickedness. In Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, it says that those in Sodom were arrogant, they were overfed, they were unconcerned, they didn't care about the poor or the needy, they were haughty, and they did detestable things before the Lord. What were those detestable things? Jude, verse 7, says that they gave themselves up to sexual immorality, to sexual perversion. A man would lie with a man as a man should lie with a woman. In chapter 18, the angels came and visited Abraham, and they told him that they were going down to Sodom to destroy it. Abraham pleaded for Sodom because he knew that his nephew Lot lived there in Sodom. He asked the question, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" Then the Lord said, "I will not do that." Abraham said, "Well, if there are 50 righteous people there, will you spare the city?" The Lord said in chapter 18, verse 26, "If I find 50 righteous, I will spare the city for their sake." The righteous were holding back judgment. The same is true today. Christians are holding back God's judgment. When the church is gone, judgment will come. So Abraham pleaded for Sodom. He started with 50 and he went all the way down to 10. And God said, "If there are 10 righteous there, I will spare the city." Well, when the angels arrived there in Sodom, they appeared as men. They met Lot there at the city gate. Now, this was not like a gate that had a hinge to it, but the gate was a place of holding court. It was where judgments were made. And so Lot was a person of influence. He was sitting there in the gates. He pleaded with the angels to stay at his house. That night, it says that in verses 4 and 5, that there in Sodom, the men of that city, from young to old, all surrounded the city and demanded that Lot bring those men out so that they might violate them, so they might have sex with them. The angels, they blinded all of those that were there. And then the angels told Lot to gather his family together and flee because they were going to destroy this place. In verse 16, Lot hesitated. And so the angels literally took their hands and led them out. In verse 17, then the angel said, "Run for your lives. Do not look back and do not stop until you reach the mountains. Flee there." Lot didn't think that they could make it. And so he asked, "Can we stay in a small city there in the plain?" In verse 22, the angel said, "Flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." Judgment could not come until the righteous were gone. God does not judge the righteous with the unrighteous. This is one reason why we believe in the rapture, because judgment will come in Revelation, but the church has to be gone. In the time of tribulation, those were times of judgment where God is judging the world, and he will not judge the righteous with the unrighteous. Chapter 19 is a very sad story. It's a sad story of Sodom and Gomorrah and the people that were living there and the decisions and the choices that they had made. It was also a sad story about Lot. Lot was worldly. He was carnal, just like people today. Lot chose wealth and comfort and pleasure. He looked at the well-watered plains near Sodom and he decided, that's where I want to be. My life will be good there, not knowing that it would actually destroy his life. He got close to Sodom and he stayed. And then he even got closer to Sodom and he settled in. Lot used to be a nomad living in tents. But here in chapter 19, we find the very first word house mentioned in the Bible. Lot had left his tents and he had a house there in Sodom. In Jude, verse 7, it says that Lot was a righteous man, but he was troubled in his soul because of everything that he saw and heard there in Sodom. He saw the sin that was happening all around him, but it wasn't enough for him to leave. It didn't affect him to the point where he was willing to take his family out of that situation. And the result was the disaster came upon his family. When the angels told Lot to take his family and flee and do not look back, his wife looked back and she died and became a pillar like salt. Later, his daughters got him drunk and had an incestuous relationship with him so they might become pregnant. They didn't have any shame about what they were doing. It could have been because of their past relationships there in Sodom. They had no shame. They left Sodom, but Sodom never left them. Again, chapter 19 is a very sad story. What are some sad lessons that we learn from this chapter? One is that when you tolerate sin, it will always affect you and your family. Another is that sin has consequences, but judgment will eventually come. And then we need to take God seriously. Sin will blind your eyes. It will harden your heart and will always eventually destroy your life. Chapter 19 is a sad account, but it's here so that we might learn the lessons and we might take God seriously. Thank you for joining the Word for 2021.